There's a moment in some marriages, quiet, unremarkable on the surface, where everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping next to you dissolves in an instant. Not with a fight, not with a slammed door or a confession, but with something far smaller. Something as ordinary and domestic and American as a cup of tea sitting on a kitchen counter. And what Claire saw on that Tuesday night in the kitchen of her own home. The home she had kept for 24 years. The home where she had raised her children and planted her garden and folded David's shirts every Sunday without complaint. What she saw in those few seconds changed everything. Not just her marriage, not just her future, but her understanding of every single day that had come before. She did not scream. She did not cry. She stood perfectly still in that hallway shadow, and she made a decision that most people would never be brave enough to make, and that almost no one would be disciplined enough to carry out. She decided to say absolutely nothing, and then she waited. For 90 days, Claire waited. And while David thought he was in complete control of what was happening inside that house, he had no idea that the woman he believed he had already silenced was watching his every single move. Before we go any further into this story, there are 3 questions I want you to hold in your mind, because by the time this video ends, the answers to all 3 of them are going to hit you in a way you're simply not prepared for right now. The first question is this: what exactly was David putting into Claire's tea every single night? And what was it doing to her body and her mind over the months before she discovered it? The second question is the one that investigators themselves found most troubling when this case finally came to light. Why? What could possibly drive a man who coached Little League, who shook hands at church, who was described by his neighbors as one of the most decent guys on the block? What could drive a man like that to do something like this to his own wife, night after night, inside the home they shared? And the third question is the one that stopped the room cold when it finally came out. Because it turned out that Claire had not just been watching David for 3 months. She had been carrying a secret of her own, something she had never told her attorney, never written in her journal, never breathed to a single soul. And when that secret came out, it reframed everything. Absolutely everything. Stay with me. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened inside that house, you have to understand who Claire was before any of it began. And the truth is, Claire was the kind of woman that most people in her town quietly admired without ever fully saying so out loud. She grew up in a small working-class neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 daughters born to a postman and a part-time bookkeeper. Her childhood was not wealthy, but it was steady, and her mother, a woman of few words and deep watchfulness, raised all 3 girls with one consistent instruction: pay attention to what people do, not what they say. Claire took that lesson and made it the foundation of her entire life. She was a reader from the time she could hold a book. She was the girl in school who remembered everything, not in a showy way, not in the way that annoyed people, but in the quiet, precise way of someone who understood instinctively that information is protection. She earned a teaching degree from Ohio State, married briefly in her late 20s, had 2 children, a daughter and a son. And after that marriage ended amicably, she threw herself completely into her work and her children and found, to her own surprise, that she was genuinely content. She taught 6th grade English for 19 years at the same middle school in the same district and was, by every account from every parent and student and administrator who ever worked with her, extraordinary at it. She had a particular gift for the kids who struggled, the ones who sat in the back, who looked at the floor when called on, who had learned somewhere along the way to make themselves invisible. Those were the children Claire sought out. Those were the ones she remembered by name long after they had graduated and moved on. Her former students still talk about her. And then, in the spring of 1999, at a mutual friend's backyard cookout on a warm Saturday afternoon in May, Claire met David. David made an extraordinary first impression. That is not something that anyone who ever met him would dispute. He was tall, well-built, with the kind of easy, natural confidence that fills a room without demanding it. He remembered names. He asked follow-up questions. He laughed at the right and went quiet at the right moments, and he had a handshake, firm, direct, eye contact held the whole time, that made people feel immediately, and without quite knowing why, that they could trust him. He had grown up in western Pennsylvania, the only son of a retired Army sergeant and a devout Catholic schoolteacher, and the discipline of that upbringing was visible in everything he did. His house was always neat. His car was always clean. He was never late. He had been a regional sales manager for a medical supply company for over a decade by the time he met Claire, and he was good at his job with the same natural fluency with which he was good at everything that required presenting a version of himself to the world. His co-workers liked him. His neighbors liked him. He coached his stepson's Little League team for 6 years after he and Claire married in 2001, and every single parent on that field believed they knew exactly who David was. The life he and Claire built together, from the outside, looked like the life most people spend their whole lives working toward. A 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. A garden Claire tended every spring. Family dinners on Sundays. Vacations to the Carolina coast. Christmas cards with a photo. Everything in its place, everything as it should be, or so it seemed from every angle that the outside world was ever permitted to see. But marriages have an inside and an outside. And the inside of this one had been changing for years before Claire ever stood in that hallway. The people who knew Claire and David, as a couple would later say, when pressed, that the shift was gradual enough that none of them could point to a single moment when they noticed it. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't one incident. It was more like a slow, persistent dimming, the kind you don't notice day to day because each individual day looks almost exactly like the one before it. Claire's closest friend, a woman named Sandra who had known her since their children were in kindergarten together, would later recall noticing that Claire had stopped initiating plans sometime around 2016. She stopped suggesting dinners. She stopped calling first. When Sandra reached out, Claire was always warm, always present, but there was something underneath the warmth that Sandra could not quite name at the time. A tiredness, not the normal tiredness of a busy life, but something deeper, something that felt, Sandra would say later, like a woman who was using all of her available energy just to hold herself upright. Claire's adult daughter, Ashley, noticed it too. She later told investigators that beginning around 2017, her mother seemed consistently foggy on their phone calls. She would lose her train of thought mid-sentence. She would repeat things she had said 10 minutes earlier, with no awareness that she had already said them. Ashley had initially attributed it to the natural process of aging. Her mother was in her early 50s, and Ashley had read enough to know that hormonal changes could affect memory and cognitive clarity. She suggested her mother see a doctor. Claire said she had. She said the doctor thought it was stress. She said she was fine, but she was not fine. And somewhere, in the part of her mind that had not yet gone soft and uncertain, Claire was beginning to understand why. The tea had been a ritual from the beginning of their marriage, and that detail matters more than it might first appear. It was David who started it. In the early years, it had been one of the gestures that Claire had found most endearing about him. Every evening around 9 o'clock, David would go to the kitchen and prepare 2 cups of tea. Chamomile, usually, or sometimes a mild peppermint blend. He would bring them out on a small tray, always on a tray, always with a small plate of something, crackers, or a few squares of dark chocolate, and they would sit together in the living room and drink them before bed. It was the kind of intimate domestic routine that becomes, over the years, as automatic and unremarkable as brushing your teeth. Claire had never once questioned it. Why would she? It was the man she had married. It was her home. It was her evening tea. But somewhere around 2016, Claire began to notice that after her evening tea, she felt different. Not relaxed in the pleasant way she had always felt. Different in a way that was harder to describe. Heavier, not quite herself. She would wake the next morning with a thickness behind her eyes that would not lift until mid-afternoon, and some mornings she would struggle to recall exactly what she and David had talked about the night before. She mentioned it to her doctor at her annual physical in 2017. The doctor checked her thyroid, ran some basic blood work. Everything came back normal. The doctor mentioned perimenopause, mentioned stress, mentioned that women her age often experience disrupted sleep cycles and mild cognitive fatigue as a result. Claire nodded and went home. She did not push. She was a woman who had spent decades learning not to push. But she started paying attention in a different way. A more careful way. The kind of attention she used to pay to the quiet kids in the back row. It was a Tuesday in early October when Claire came downstairs for a glass of water. She had been in bed reading, had finished her chapter, had reached for the glass on her nightstand, and found it empty. She got up quietly, barefoot, and started down the hall toward the stairs. The kitchen light was on. She could hear David moving around below her. She had nearly called out to him. She was one step from the top of the staircase when something stopped her. She did not know, then or later, exactly what it was. A sound that was slightly wrong. A pause that lasted a beat too long. Some signal so quiet and instinctual that she could not have named it in words. She stepped back. She stood at the top of the stairs and listened. And then she moved down, slowly, and she stopped in the shadow of the hallway, just before the kitchen entrance, where the light did not reach. David was standing at the counter with his back to her. On the counter in front of him were two mugs, the blue one with the chipped handle on the left, the green one on the right. The blue one was always Claire's. That was the routine, had been for years. Claire watched as David opened a cabinet, the upper cabinet to the left of the stove, the one where they kept the vitamins and the ibuprofen, and took something out. A small bottle. She could not see it clearly from where she stood. She watched him hold it for a moment, look at it, then tap something from it very carefully into the blue mug. He did it methodically, deliberately, without hesitation. Then he replaced the bottle, closed the cabinet, picked up the tray, and turned toward the living room. Claire was already back up the stairs before he cleared the kitchen doorway. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark when David appeared in the bedroom doorway and told her he'd left her tea on the side table. She thanked him. She listened to him settle into the living room with the television on, and then she sat there in the dark for a very long time. The cup of tea sat on the side table, steaming and untouched, and Claire stared at it, and 24 years of marriage settled around her like fog settling over a field in the middle of the night. She had always known the fog was there. She just had not, until this moment, understood what was causing it. Most people, when they try to imagine what they would do in that moment, arrive at the same instinctive answer. They would confront him. They would call someone. They would demand answers. They would not spend another night in that house. But Claire was not most people, and she understood something with cold, precise clarity that most people do not understand until it is too late. That confrontation without evidence is not power. It is exposure. She was a woman who had spent years in a fog that she now understood was not her own. She had been to doctors who had found nothing wrong. She had been told, implicitly and explicitly, that her symptoms were the natural consequences of her age and her nerves and her hormones. If she walked into that living room and accused David of drugging her tea, she knew exactly what would happen. He would deny it. He would be calm and reasonable and slightly concerned. He would suggest, gently, that she was not well, and he would have years of her own medical history and her own reported symptoms to point to as evidence of exactly that. She had no proof. Not yet. She had only what she had seen, and what she had seen could be explained away by a man with David's composure and David's talent for appearing completely reasonable under pressure. She needed something that could not be argued with. Something physical. Something documented. Something that a person could hold in their hands and look at and reach only one possible conclusion from. And so Claire made the decision that would define the next 3 months of her life. She would say nothing. She would go downstairs the next evening at the usual time, and she would take her tea, and she would smile, and she would find a reason, any reason, every reason, to swap those cups before either of them drank. And she would document everything she saw. She went to her reading room that night and took a book off the third shelf, a paperback collection of American short stories that David had never once picked up in 24 years, and she hollowed it out. And that was where she put her journal. The first entry was dated the following morning. It said only this: "I know, and I am ready." What followed over the next 3 months was one of the most extraordinary acts of quiet, sustained self-preservation that investigators on this case said they had ever encountered in their combined careers. Every evening, without exception, Claire performed a swap. She studied David's routine with the precision of someone who had 19 years of classroom experience learning how to track human behavior without being detected. She noted that David always placed the blue mug, her mug, on the left side of the tray. She noted that he always carried the tray with both hands and set it down on the coffee table before going back to the kitchen for whatever small snack he had prepared. She noted that he always returned to the kitchen for approximately 45 seconds to a minute. And in those 45 seconds, Claire would stand, cross to the coffee table, and switch the mugs. She did it so naturally, so smoothly, that even if David had walked back in mid-switch, it would have looked like nothing more than a woman picking up her tea. She was a woman who had spent 2 decades managing 25 11-year-olds at a time. She understood how to appear unbothered. She understood how to hold a face still when everything inside her was screaming. And every night, after the tea, she watched. Day 4 of the journal. He is drowsy before 10 o'clock. Day 9. He fell asleep mid-sentence and did not remember what we were talking about when he woke up. Day 14. He slept 11 hours and called into work. Day 22. He does not remember the conversation we had about Ashley's birthday dinner. Day 31. He accused me of being distant and forgetful. I agreed with him. The entries continued for 78 pages. Claire also began, for the first time in years, to think clearly enough to notice other things. The tea, or rather, its absence in her own bloodstream, was lifting a curtain that had been drawn around her mind for longer than she had realized. And what she began to see in the clarifying weeks of that autumn went far beyond a small bottle from a kitchen cabinet. The financial records came first. Claire had always had access to their joint account. She had simply, in the foggy years, stopped scrutinizing it the way she once had. But now, with her mind restored to something closer to its natural sharpness, she began going through the statements carefully and methodically, the way she used to go through her students' essays, line by line, looking for the thing that did not belong. What she found was a pattern of small withdrawals, consistent and recurring, that she could not account for. Not large enough to be alarming at a glance. Not the kind of thing that would trigger a bank alert, but consistent, and when added together across 18 months, significant. There was a name that appeared on several credit card charges that Claire did not recognize. A name associated with a property management company in a city 3 hours away that David had not once mentioned visiting. There were trips on his calendar that did not align with the travel schedules his company had on file. And there was something else. Something that Claire found not in the shared account, not in the credit card statements, but in a document she came across entirely by accident when she was looking for their homeowner's insurance information in the filing cabinet in David's home office. It was a life insurance policy. They had always had one. They had taken it out together in the early years of their marriage. Mutual beneficiaries, standard and unremarkable. But this was not that policy. This was a second policy taken out on Claire's life 18 months prior, with a payout of $450,000. Claire was not listed as the beneficiary. David was the sole beneficiary. Claire had never been told this policy existed. She had never signed any document authorizing it. She stood in David's office for a long moment with that document in her hand, and then she photographed every page of it carefully on her phone, replaced it exactly as she had found it, closed the filing cabinet, and walked back to her reading room. She opened the hollowed-out book and wrote 4 words in her journal. This is not enough. She needed everything documented before she made a single move. And she was not done. This is the part of Claire's story that even her own attorney did not know about until the day the case formally opened. And it is the detail that, when it finally came to light, changed the entire legal and emotional weight of everything that followed. Approximately 11 weeks before Claire contacted the police, so roughly 1 month in her 90-day silent operation, perhaps 3 weeks after she first swapped the cups, she drove alone to a private medical laboratory 40 minutes from her home. She paid in cash. She gave a false name for the intake form. She requested a comprehensive toxicology screen of her own blood. She told the intake nurse she was concerned about potential medication sensitivity. The nurse processed the request without incident. The results came back 6 days later by secure email. They were not normal. The screen detected measurable levels of two compounds in Claire's blood, a benzodiazepine derivative and a mild dissociative sedative, neither of which had ever been prescribed to her, neither of which appeared in any of her medical records, and both of which her subsequent research confirmed were consistent with the symptoms she had been experiencing for years: fatigue, memory gaps, emotional flatness, difficulty concentrating, reduced ability to advocate for herself in moments of stress. The compounds were present at levels that a toxicologist would later describe as consistent with long-term, low-dose chronic exposure. Not an acute poisoning, but a sustained, deliberate campaign of chemical control carried out over an extended period. Claire printed that lab report, folded it once, placed it in a sealed envelope, and taped it to the inside back cover of the hollowed-out book. She did not tell anyone it existed. She did not write about it in her journal. She continued to make the tea. She continued to swap the cups. She continued to watch. And she waited for the right moment to use it as the final, irrefutable piece of the case she was building. A case that, by the time she was done, would be more organized and more thoroughly documented than most people could produce with professional legal assistance. By day 85, Claire had assembled what her attorney, a woman who had practiced domestic law for 27 years, would later describe as the most comprehensive self-collected evidence file she had ever seen a civilian produce. Inside the hollowed-out book and a fireproof lockbox Claire had quietly purchased and kept in her car, there were 78 handwritten journal entries covering 90 days of observations, each dated and time-stamped, each documenting David's behavior in clinical, precise language free of emotion or editorializing. There were 14 small Ziploc bags, each labeled with a date, each containing a dried residue sample scraped carefully from the inside of the blue mug on nights when Claire had been able to collect it without David noticing. There were photographs of the life insurance policy documents, the financial records, the credit card statements, and the charges associated with the property management company in the city 3 hours away. There was a USB drive containing 3 months of footage from a small camera Claire had purchased online and placed, legally, in a shared common area of the home, on the kitchen counter, positioned to appear as an ordinary smart device. That footage contained, across dozens of hours, clear and repeated visual documentation of David retrieving the small bottle from the upper cabinet, tapping its contents in the blue mug, replacing it, and carrying the tray to the living room. It also contained something Claire had not anticipated capturing: a phone call, partially audible, that David had taken one evening while standing at the kitchen counter, in which he discussed what appeared to be a meeting with a financial advisor about an asset restructuring plan. And sealed inside its envelope, taped to the inside back cover of the book, was the private lab report, with its date clearly stamped 11 weeks before any formal complaint was ever filed. On day 89, Claire made 2 phone calls. The first was to the domestic violence attorney. The second was to the non-emergency line of her local police department. The detective assigned to Claire's case had been with the department for 22 years. He had worked hundreds of domestic cases. He had seen evidence ranging from a single, tearful statement to boxes of disorganized paperwork to nothing at all except a woman's word against a man who had already called his lawyer. He had seen it all, or he thought he had. When Claire walked into the precinct on a Thursday morning in January, carrying a tote bag with a lockbox inside it and the hollowed-out book under her arm, and sat down across from the detective and began to lay her materials on the table one by one. The journals, the evidence bags, the USB drive, the financial documents, the photographs, and finally the sealed envelope with the lab report. He later said that the room felt different after every item she placed on that table. Not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that settles over a room when everyone in it suddenly understands that something very serious has been happening and that the person sitting across from them understood it long before anyone else did. The mug residue samples were sent immediately to the county forensic lab. Results came back within 72 hours. Both the benzodiazepine derivative and the dissociative sedative compound were confirmed present in the residue of 14 separate samples across a 90-day period. The private lab report, when opened, showed the same compounds present in Claire's bloodstream 11 weeks earlier, meaning the documented timeline of deliberate poisoning extended back well beyond the 3 months Claire had been collecting evidence. The detective applied for a search warrant that afternoon. It was granted the following morning. When investigators entered the home and searched the upper kitchen cabinet, the one Claire had described in her journal, the one visible in the kitchen camera footage, they found the small bottle exactly where she had documented it. They also found 2 additional substances in a locked drawer in David's home office that had not appeared in Claire's documentation at all. And when they examined David's personal computer, what they found on it expanded the scope of the investigation in a direction that even Claire, in all her careful watching, had not fully anticipated. The forensic analysis of David's computer took 11 days. What it revealed was not a man who had acted on impulse or desperation. What it revealed was a man who had been planning, researching, and systematically executing a long-term strategy, and who had been doing so for at minimum 2.5 years before Claire ever stood in that hallway. There were folders buried deep in the drive under innocuous names, containing extensive research into the cognitive and behavioral effects of long-term low-dose sedative exposure. Research into memory impairment. Research into how prolonged benzodiazepine exposure affects a person's ability to make clear financial decisions, to contest legal documents, to maintain credibility in adversarial legal proceedings. There were drafts, multiple drafts, revised over months, of what appeared to be a separation agreement structured so heavily in David's favor that Claire's attorney, when she reviewed them, said she had never seen terms that one-sided outside of cases where one party had been rendered completely incapable of negotiating for themselves. There were emails sent from a secondary account investigators only found through a subpoena to an individual who was later identified as a financial consultant with a prior conviction for wire fraud. The content of those emails discussed strategies for asset transfer in the context of a divorce where one party's mental fitness was in question. And there was the insurance policy, the $450,000 policy on Claire's life that she had photographed in his filing cabinet. That policy had been taken out 20 months before Claire stood in the hallway, which meant that at the time David took it out, he had almost certainly already been altering her tea for months. The lead detective summarized it in his report with a single sentence that Claire's attorney would later read aloud in court. This was not a crime of passion. This was an architecture. David was brought in for questioning on a Friday afternoon. He arrived without an attorney, which investigators noted. He was calm. His posture was open. His eye contact, as always, was impeccable. He thanked the detective for his time. He said he was glad to help clear things up. He said he was very worried about Claire. He said she had been struggling for some time, with her memory, with her mood, with what he described, carefully and with evident regret, as a kind of paranoia that had been escalating over the past year. He said he had been trying to support her. He said he had spoken to her doctor about his concerns. He said the situation had been very hard on him. The detective let David speak. He nodded. He took notes. He did not interrupt. And then, when David had finished, the detective placed the first item on the table between them. It was a still frame from the kitchen camera footage. David at the counter, the small bottle in his hand, the blue mug in front of him. David looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's not what it looks like." The detective placed the next item on the table, and the next, and the next. 14 evidence bags, the lab report, the computer printouts, the insurance policy, the financial records, the emails, the forensic toxicology confirmation, one by one, in silence, while David's attorney, now called and on the way, had not yet arrived. And then, when the last item was on the table, the detective looked across at David and waited. And David, according to the detective's written account of the interview, looked at the table for a long moment, looked up, and smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not a frightened smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent decades believing that his intelligence and his composure and his ability to present himself as the most reasonable person in any room would always, ultimately, be enough. He was wrong, and somewhere in that smile, the detective later wrote in his notes, was everything anyone needed to know about how this marriage had worked for the last several years. David was charged with domestic assault by chemical coercive control, a charge that, as of the time of this case, was being actively pursued in an increasing number of American states, along with financial fraud, insurance fraud, and one count of criminal tampering in connection with the fraudulently obtained life insurance policy. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement that avoided a full jury trial, a decision that his legal team publicly framed as being in David's best interest, but that observers of the case, and Claire's attorney, believe had more to do with the quality of the evidence against him than with any genuine remorse on David's part. Under the terms of the plea, David received a suspended sentence of 4 years with 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory psychiatric evaluation and counseling, forfeiture of all claims to Claire's personal and inherited property, full financial restitution covering the costs of Claire's medical treatment and legal fees, and a permanent protective order prohibiting any contact with Claire, her children, or her known associates. He was required to surrender his passport. He was placed on a domestic violence offender registry. The insurance policy on Claire's life was voided and the premiums refunded. Many people who followed this case closely, and it was followed closely, particularly in the domestic violence advocacy community and in the growing legal discussion around coercive control as a criminally prosecutable offense, felt that the outcome was insufficient relative to the scope and duration of what David had done. That conversation is still ongoing. Coercive control laws in the United States vary dramatically from state to state, and the legal framework for prosecuting chemical coercive control specifically is still, in many jurisdictions, not yet equipped to reflect the full reality of what this kind of sustained, deliberate manipulation does to a person's life. Claire lives today in the house she inherited from her mother. It is a modest place on a quiet street, with a porch that faces west and a garden in the back that she has been slowly reclaiming from years of neglect. She is in therapy, has been since the week after the case formally opened, and she describes the process of recovery not as dramatic or sudden, but as steady and incremental, the way a garden comes back. There are days that are harder than others. There are mornings when she wakes up and the first thing she feels, before anything else, is the simple and still slightly surprising fact of clarity, of knowing that what she thinks is what she thinks, that her memory is her own, that the fog is gone. She has reconnected with Sandra, with Ashley, with her son, with the friends and the life that had been made small and dim and far away during the years when David had been managing her perception of reality one cup of tea at a time. She has spoken, cautiously and on her own terms, to a small number of journalists and domestic violence advocates who have worked on cases similar to hers. She does not consider herself a public figure or a symbol. She considers herself a woman who had a very good education and a very particular set of skills and the enormous good fortune of standing at the top of those stairs on a Tuesday night in October and paying attention to a sound that was slightly wrong. She said something once in a brief written statement that her attorney shared with investigators and that has since been quoted in more than one domestic violence training context. She said, "The tea was never just about the tea. It was about making me doubt myself, making me small enough to stop asking questions. But here is the thing he never understood, and the thing I want every woman who has ever been made to feel uncertain about her own mind to hear. Doubt is not the same as defeat. I was doubting myself every single day, and I was still watching." There is something that stays with you about this story long after you have heard all of it. It is not the evidence. It is not the legal proceedings. It is not even the shock of what David was doing night after night in a kitchen that smelled like chamomile and looked like every other kitchen in every other quiet house on every other ordinary street in America. What stays with you is the image of Claire sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark on a Tuesday night in October, with a cup of tea on the side table that she did not drink, making a decision in total silence that most people would not have had the steadiness to make, and then keeping that decision for 90 days. Not because she had given up, not because she was afraid, though she was, but because she understood something essential and hard and true, that in a situation where the other person holds most of the apparent power, patience is not weakness. Patience, when it is strategic and intentional and backed by evidence, is the most powerful thing a person can possess. Coercive control rarely announces itself. It does not come through the door wearing a mask. It comes through the door with a tray and 2 cups of tea and a smile that you have trusted for 20 years. It comes in the form of a fog so gradual and so complete that you stop noticing you are in it. It comes in small erosions, a foggy morning, a forgotten conversation, a confidence quietly dismantled and never replaced. And it depends absolutely and entirely on one thing, that the person is being done to will stop paying attention. Claire never stopped. She just got quieter about it. And if there is one thing this story asks of every single person watching it tonight, it is simply this: trust what you notice. Trust the sound that is slightly wrong. Trust the instinct that makes you step back from the top of the stairs instead of calling out. The people we love the most are sometimes the ones we most need to watch. And the quietest person in the room is very often the one who has already figured out exactly what is happening. I want to ask you something before you go, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Not just a reaction, but your actual, honest, considered answer. If you had been Claire, standing at the top of those stairs on that Tuesday night, what would you have done? Would you have been able to hold yourself still for 90 days the way she did? Or would you have confronted him that first night? There is no wrong answer. But I think the conversation that happens in the comments of a video like this one is one of the most important conversations any of us can have, because this story is not as rare as we want it to be. And the more we talk about what it actually looks like, the harder it becomes for it to stay invisible. What do you think about the legal outcome? Was it fair? Was justice really served here, given the full picture of what David had planned and what he had already done? And one more thing, and I mean this genuinely. If this story stayed with you, if something in it made you think about someone you know, or something you've noticed, or something you've been trying to find words for, please share it. Not for the channel, for that person. Coming up next, I'm going to take you inside a case that begins in the most unlikely place, a small-town community center in rural Tennessee, and ends with a confession that left a courtroom completely silent for almost a full minute. You think you have heard stories of betrayal. You have not heard this one. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And until next time, stay sharp, stay watching, and trust what you notice.